They dropped a notice in my mailbox saying I owed $250,000 in back HOA fees. Yeah, 250 grand. For a ranch that had been in my family since 1953. The first I left, I thought it was some kind of joke. But then I saw the paper was stamped, notarized, all official looking. Some guy in a white golf cart had delivered it, wearing a tiny HOA badge around his neck like he worked for the damn government. I crumpled it up and chucked it aside, until I glanced up and saw it. A gated clubhouse. A luxury tennis court. A kid's playground. All of it sitting on my land. I froze. I slowly backed up, eyes following the metal fence, the fancy paved paths, all winding right through what used to be grazing land for our cattle. My grandfather cleared that field with nothing but his hands. We had the deed. That land was mine. But there it was, half their fancy private community park built smack in the middle of my family's ranch. And now they were charging me fees, while squatting on my property. Before I could even wrap my head around it, there was a loud knock at the door. Standing outside was a woman with a bright pink HOA polo, arms folded, face red, pants a crisp khaki. "Mr. Josh Miller?" she asked, flashing a tight, fake smile. "Yeah," I said slowly. "You've got 7 days to pay, or we begin lien proceedings." "Lien proceedings?" I repeated with a laugh. "Lady, you're standing on my land." Her smile dropped. "Excuse me." I stepped forward, heart thumping, holding out a printed satellite map I'd just grabbed from my drawer. "You put your tennis court right through my grandfather's north field." And that's when things blew up. But I'll leave it there for now. 'Cause what happened next? Well, let's just say the HOA had no idea who they were messing with. It all started maybe 6 months earlier. That's when I came back home from Oregon, after my dad passed away. The ranch is out in Jasper County, Texas. Over 200 acres of grassland, fence lines, and old, weather-beaten barns. I hadn't planned on staying. Just wanted to clean things up, maybe lease it to someone local, and then head back to my job at a software company in Portland. My dad had passed quietly in his sleep. He hadn't said much about what was going on in the area. The only clue was a short phone call. He mentioned the neighboring plots were turning into some kind of fancy new development. He didn't sound worried, just kind of irritated. I didn't think much of it. But that first week when I drove in, something felt off. The dirt road had been paved over. There was this big stone sign now, Maple Ridge Estates, right where the old mailbox used to sit. And past the tree line, where we used to camp as kids, there was a playground. Bright, colorful, trimmed grass and all. That's when things started to get under my skin. I pulled into the ranch driveway, my driveway, and had to stop and wait for a whole line of people. Bikers, kids on scooters, folks walking dogs. I didn't recognize a single face. By the third day, there was a notice taped to the barn door. HOA violation. It said something about not following their landscaping standards. I stared at it. Landscaping standards? This is a working ranch. I figured it had to be a mix-up, so that afternoon I drove over to the HOA office. It was this prefab building tucked behind the tennis courts. The receptionist barely glanced up, chewing gum, and handed me a thick packet labeled Community Guidelines. I asked, "Why did I get this?" She goes, "If you live in Maple Ridge, you're part of the HOA." I said, "I don't live in Maple Ridge. This is Miller Ranch. We've been here way before any of this showed up." She shrugged. "The map says otherwise." That's when the gut feeling hit me. Something was seriously wrong. I went back home and started digging through every document I could find, deeds, maps, old surveys from the county office. I stayed up past 2 a.m., lining them up alongside Google Earth overlays. What I found made my stomach sink. The HOA's map wasn't just wrong, it was designed to look right. They'd shifted the southern property line almost 200 feet to the north. And right in that stretch, that's where they'd built everything. The clubhouse, the tennis court, the community garden, even that curvy concrete walkway lined with solar lights. Every inch of it was on my land. First thing the next morning, I called the county. Took about a week to get a surveyor out there, but when he finally showed up, he took one look, tapped his boot against a stake in the ground, and said, "Yep, fence line's off. You're looking at 21 feet here, And 17 over there, too far north. Then he grinned and added, Maple Ridge HOA is about to have a real bad day. I thought that was it. I figured the law would be on my side, right? I was wrong. That was just the beginning. The very next morning, I woke up to the sound of beep 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 outside my bedroom window. I jumped out of bed, pulled on my boots, stormed out the front door, and nearly face-planted over a damn bulldozer parked right in my driveway. What the hell is this? I shouted. There was a guy in a yellow vest standing nearby, clipboard in hand. He looked up, real casual. Morning, sir. We're clearing the front lot for uniform fencing. HOA orders. I stared at him. On whose authority? Maple Ridge, he said. My voice dropped. This is Mitchell Ranch. You're trespassing. He looked confused, then reached for his walkie-talkie. Before I could say anything else, more trucks rolled in, 4 of them, hauling fencing supplies, gravel, and even a porta-potty. I shoved past him, heart pounding, and made a beeline for the HOA office. Didn't knock. I slammed that door open so hard the bell above it rang like a fire alarm. Where's Karen? I yelled. Karen was the woman who'd shown up at my door last week with that smug little smile and the $250,000 notice. She strolled out of the back, sipping coffee like it was just another Tuesday. Well, Mr. Mitchell, that's quite the entrance. I slapped a printed copy of the official county survey on the counter. You built on my land. This proves it. She didn't even glance at it. Just said, our map says otherwise. That's not a legal map, I snapped. She paused, took a slow breath, then smiled again. Then sue us. Those 3 words hit me like a bucket of ice water. Karen knew exactly what she was doing. She was calling my bluff. Daring me to take them to court, knowing I probably couldn't afford it. See, the ranch had just cleared probate. I hadn't sold a thing yet. I was still working through taxes, trying to get repair estimates. My dad's will still had a few loose ends, and I was hanging on to every dollar I had. The HOA? They had lawyers. A whole legal team paid for by over 200 homeowners. And from what the neighbors had started telling me, this wasn't the first time they'd pulled something like this. Just never on land this size. I walked out of that office fuming. That night, I sat alone at the old dining table in my dad's cabin, flipping through paperwork and emails. I really didn't want to call my Uncle Frank, but I was out of options. He was the only attorney in the family. Retired Navy JAG officer. Knew the system inside and out. He picked up on the second ring. Uncle Frank, I said, I need help. When I told him what happened, he actually laughed, for a good 10 seconds. They built on your land, he said, chuckling, and then tried to charge you for it? That's the dumbest bluff I've ever heard. It's not a bluff, I said quietly, if I can't stop them. Then he got serious. Listen, you don't need a fight, you need leverage. That was the first time I started to see things differently. That was the word that stuck with me, leverage. Uncle Frank got me in touch with a property rights attorney named Sarah. She had this sharp, no-nonsense way of talking and a real passion for land disputes. When she finished going through the paperwork, she actually laughed on the phone. Ethan, she said, they messed up big time. But the HOA wasn't letting up. That same week, they mailed me a second letter. They tacked on a $15,000 late fee, bringing the total to $265,000. And if that wasn't enough, they claimed my cattle were a hazard to children and had to be removed within 48 hours, or they'd call animal control. I couldn't believe it. It was like they thought I didn't exist, like the ranch wasn't even mine. So, I followed Frank's advice. I didn't respond. Didn't argue. I stayed quiet and started documenting everything. I set up trail cams all over the place. I recorded every truck that rolled over the line, every kid that wandered through, every contractor that parked on my property without permission. Sarah helped me send them a certified cease and desist. They ignored it. So we went nuclear. We filed a formal quiet title lawsuit. Basically, we were forcing the county court to make a legal call on who owned the land. Just to file the thing cost me $7,000. I had to drain most of my savings to do it. And right when I thought it couldn't get any worse, a group of HOA board members rolled up to my ranch, with a sheriff in tow. Linda was out front, of course, waving a bright pink folder like she was holding the Constitution. "We're here to serve official notice of property seizure," she said, "due to non-payment." The sheriff gave me a confused look. "You got your own documents?" I nodded and handed him the thick folder I'd been carrying around like my life depended on it. Inside were the county deeds, surveys, legal filings, everything. He flipped through it for a minute. His brow furrowed. "Ma'am," he said, turning to Linda, "this isn't cut and dry. I'm not seizing anything today." Her face went red. "But the board voted." "Doesn't matter," the sheriff said firmly. "This is going to court." That was my first real win. It was small, but man, it felt good to finally breathe. Still, I could see it in Linda's eyes. She wasn't finished. Not even close. The morning of the court hearing came like a storm rolling in. I wore my dad's old leather boots and the cleanest pair of jeans I had. Tried to look respectable. Sarah met me outside the courthouse, binder in hand, fire in her eyes but calm as ever. "You ready?" she asked. I took a breath. "Not really," I said. "But let's do it anyway." We walked into this tiny county courtroom, old wood benches, flickering overhead lights, one ceiling fan lazily spinning like it didn't care if anyone was sweating bullets. Linda showed up looking like she was running for office. Tall heels, flashy sunglasses, and a shiny binder she clutched like it was gospel. This time, she didn't even try to smile. The judge called us up and asked for opening statements. Sarah stood tall and steady. "Your Honor, my client, Ethan Mitchell, is the rightful owner of Mitchell Ranch. His family has held that land since 1953. The HOA has built structures on his property without permission and is now charging him outrageous fees for land they have no legal claim to. We're here today to quiet the title and restore his rights." Then it was Linda's turn. "The Maple Ridge HOA operates under approved zoning and local community regulations," she said, barely lifting her eyes from the paper. "Mr. Mitchell's documents are outdated. We're working with modern planning maps that show the legal development zone." The judge leaned forward. "So, you're saying he doesn't own his land?" She hesitated. "Development permits," Linda said. Sarah jumped in before the judge could nod. "But those permits were approved based on manipulated boundary lines." That word, manipulated, hung in the air like smoke after a match strike. You could feel it settle over the room. The judge leaned back and nodded slowly. "I'll be reviewing both sets of documents thoroughly," he said. "Court will reconvene in 30 days with a final decision. Until then, the HOA is not to take any action against Mr. Ryan Mitchell or his property." Outside the courtroom, Linda stormed past me like a wind gust. "Don't think this means you've won," she snapped. I smiled and said, "Yeah, but mine can read a deed." She didn't smile back. Back at the ranch, things didn't let up, not even with the court's temporary order. Okay, folks started cruising by more often. I caught them snapping pictures of my cattle, eyeballing my fences, even tagging trees with red tape like they were planning something. Then one morning, I woke up to find the front gate locked. Not by me. A thick chain and padlock wrapped around the bars, and a shiny metal sign hung there. "Entry restricted, HOA jurisdiction." My stomach flipped. I called Sarah right away. She didn't miss a beat. "They can't lock you out of your own land," she said. "Cut it, take photos, film everything." So that's exactly what I did. I grabbed my bolt cutters, stood at the gate and made sure the camera caught everything, me cutting the lock, the sign, the date, the time. That night, I emailed the footage to Sarah and the county clerk. And just when I thought this circus couldn't get any more ridiculous, I got a call. "Mr. Mitchell?" a voice said. "This is Angela Pierce with Channel 9. We've been following reports about a rancher being harassed by a homeowners association over a land dispute. Any chance you'd talk to us on record?" At first, I hesitated. I'm not the kind of guy who likes being in front of a camera. But then I thought about the bulldozer, the bogus fines, the padlock, the clubhouse sitting on my land. Said yes. The next day, Angela showed up with a small crew, camera, boom mic, the whole setup. We stood at the fence line, where I'd marked the original deed boundary with little red flags. I told the whole story. The fees. The buildings. The court fight. 2 days later, it aired. And just like that, my inbox exploded. Emails came pouring in from all over the county, other landowners, former HOA board members, even a city zoning staffer. People had stories. About threats. About weird land deals. About being pressured into things by Maple Ridge HOA. One email jumped out. Check the HOA's original development permit. I used to work in zoning. Something about it was rushed. I remember a variance that didn't match the maps. That was the crack we needed. Sarah and I filed a request with the zoning office to see the original permit files. Took a week, but when they finally came in, it felt like unlocking a safe. Right there, buried in the paperwork, a shady variance request from 3 years ago. Signed off by a former official who, surprise, resigned just a month later under quiet investigation for approving improper zoning exceptions. We had our smoking gun. Sarah looked up from the papers, grinning across the table. "This isn't just a land dispute anymore, Ethan," she said. "This is fraud." And that night, everything changed. I was locking up the barn when I heard tires on gravel. I turned and saw a black SUV roll into the driveway. Headlights still on. I froze. 2 guys stepped out, both in suits. One held a manila envelope. "You Mitchell?" he asked. "Yeah." "Who are you?" He handed me the envelope. "We're with the state attorney's office," he said. "We'd like a word." I opened it slowly, hands trembling. Inside was a subpoena and a handwritten note. The next morning, my phone rang at exactly 6:03 a.m. It was Sarah. "They're calling a grand jury, Ethan," she said. "The state's opening a full investigation into the HOA for zoning fraud, illegal land use, and harassment." I just sat there at my kitchen table, staring into a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. A few weeks ago, I was ready to sell the ranch, leave town, and never look back. But I was about to become a key witness in a criminal case. "You good with this?" Sarah asked. I looked out the window for a second, then said, "Let them burn." Later that week, I met with the assistant district attorney in a small, windowless room at the courthouse. Her name, ironically, was Karen. And she didn't waste time. "Mr. Mitchell, we believe the HOA board knowingly used forged zoning approvals to take over private property," she said. "And we think this wasn't the first time. You're just the first one who stood up to them." She slid a folder across the table. Inside were complaints. Dozens of them. From other landowners in the area, some who had sold under pressure, some who didn't even know their land had been used. One guy had passed away not long after filing a formal protest. His family never picked up the fight. "Why me?" I asked quietly. Karen looked me straight in the eye. "Because you didn't back down." That night, I couldn't sleep. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how many lives they might have steamrolled. Families. Retired folks. Veterans. All just to throw up a fake little utopia with a playground and a dog park, built on lies. It wasn't just about my land anymore. I was in this for everyone they'd stepped on. 2 days later, I got a call I never saw coming. It was James Holloway, one of the original board members from Maple Ridge. The guy who had quietly resigned 2 years back. "I saw the news," he said. "I knew what they were doing. I just couldn't prove it back then." "Why are you calling me now?" I asked. "Because they're gonna lie, Ethan," he said. "They're gonna spin this whole thing and you're gonna need proof." He agreed to meet at a little diner off Highway 59. Wore a baseball cap pulled down low, kept looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to burst through the door. "Linda was the one who pushed for the expansion," he said. "She used zoning maps from before the floodplain got redrawn. Claimed she had approval, but it was never official." Then he slid a flash drive across the table. "She kept backups of the fake maps on her office computer," he whispered. "I made a copy before I walked out. I held that little drive like it was gold." "Why help me?" I asked. He looked down at his coffee. "Because my granddad was a farmer too. And what they did to your family could have been mine." That night, Sarah went through the files. "This is it," she said, barely above a whisper. "This proves they submitted forged documents for the development permit. Everything, The tennis court, the clubhouse, the garden walk, was built using fake data. We handed the drive over to the DA the next morning. And that's when everything blew wide open. Later that week, I found myself back on the ranch, out in one of the older fields behind the barn. There was this old concrete hatch half buried under brush. I hadn't opened it in years. Curiosity got the better of me. The metal hinges groaned as I pulled it open. Dust rose into the air, drifting through the morning light. A narrow ladder led down into the darkness. Looked like a storm shelter, or maybe some kind of storage room. I climbed down, flashlight in hand. And when I turned that beam across the walls, I froze. There were crates. Dozens of them. Waterproof boxes stacked neatly in rows. Each one marked with labels. HOA Operations, Development Plan Alpha, Legal Correspondence, and one that just read, Confidential, Do Not Remove. My heart started pounding. I reached for the first crate and pried it open. Inside that crate were documents, tons of them. Receipts, old zoning maps, and envelopes full of cash. Actual cash. Stacks of unmarked bills, wrapped in rubber bands, stuffed into manila envelopes like it was nothing. I popped open the next box, and that's when it really hit me. There were photos of land parcels, scribbled notes with addresses, names highlighted in yellow, and little red X's marked over certain properties, including mine. This wasn't just some greedy board gone rogue. This was organized. A full-blown operation. I ran back up top and called Sarah. She showed up in under an hour, with the local sheriff, now officially part of the investigation since charges had already been filed against Linda. When they stepped into that bunker and saw what I found, both of them just stood there, speechless. Sarah finally spoke. Ethan, this isn't just fraud. This is racketeering. The sheriff nodded. They were targeting landowners, pressuring them out, taking property, and funneling HOA money into who knows what. It escalated fast after that. A full task force was brought in. Forensic teams. State officials. All of those boxes? Taken in as evidence. And just like that, my ranch became ground zero in a statewide investigation. Over the next few days, more arrests followed. The guy who notarized those fake documents? Gone. A developer who'd partnered with the HOA? Cuffed. Even a city clerk who'd been burying complaints for years got pulled in. But what happened next? I never saw coming. The state attorney general contacted me personally. They wanted me to testify before a land protection committee down in Austin. Said my case could help shape new laws to protect rural property owners from HOA overreach. So I went. Wore my best shirt. Told the story straight, every detail. Held nothing back. The committee listened. The crowd clapped. And afterward, a senator shook my hand and said, "You may have just changed the game for every small landowner in this state." When I finally came home, the ranch felt like mine again. The illegal fencing was gone. The padlocks had been tossed. The fields were cleared and quiet. I even got the old windmill turning again, the one my granddad built with his own hands. Took me a few weekends and a busted knuckle or two, but it was worth it. And then one more envelope came, this one from the HOA's interim board. Official. Dear Mr. Mitchell, after a full review, we acknowledge that your property was wrongly encroached upon and subject to unauthorized HOA actions. Please find enclosed the formal withdrawal of all claims and a public apology letter to be printed in the Jasper County News. No more fines. No more threats. No more games. Just peace. But I wasn't quite done yet. There was this plot of land the HOA had grabbed for future expansion. It had been sitting empty, tied up in paperwork, until it was abandoned when the whole thing blew up. I took it and turned it into something better. A community garden and veterans retreat, open to the public, free to visit. I called it Tom's Field, after my uncle. Because when someone stands up and fights for what's right, they deserve a piece of the land they helped protect. Now, before I close this chapter, I want to ask you something. Have you or someone you know ever had an HOA go too far? Maybe they hit you with a crazy fine, or maybe, like me, they tried to take what wasn't theirs. Drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it. Let's make this a place where small property owners speak up. And hey, if this story hit home, if you cheered when Linda got hauled away in cuffs, or if you just love a good dose of justice, smash that like button, share this video, and make sure to subscribe. Because the next part? Well, let's just say, the battle wasn't over. Just when I thought everything had settled, I heard a knock at the door. And what that surprise visitor told me, it changed everything. News vans lined the street outside the HOA building. Linda was arrested, formally charged with fraud, falsifying records, trespassing, and civil harassment. 2 more board members were taken into custody that week, charged with conspiracy. I stood on the front porch of my grandfather's old cabin and watched as they were led away in handcuffs. It felt surreal, like the land itself was finally exhaling. One of the newer HOA members came up to me. He looked embarrassed, eyes on the ground. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. "I didn't know the half of what was going on. I just signed what Linda handed me." I didn't say anything, just nodded. Sometimes silence says everything. But it still wasn't over. A week later, I got a thick envelope in the mail. It was from the interim HOA board. Inside was a settlement offer, $1.2 million in exchange for dropping all civil charges and agreeing to lease out part of the land for the next 5 years. I stared at that number. $1 million too. But the money didn't tempt me. Not really. Not after everything they'd done. I picked up the phone and called Sarah. "I don't want their money," I said. "I want my land back. All of it. And I want that tennis court gone." 3 weeks later, the bulldozers came back. But this time, they weren't building anything. They were tearing it all down. The clubhouse, the court, the walking paths, all of it, dismantled, hauled off, like it was never there. That field was empty again. Quiet. Just like it used to be when I was a kid, chasing fireflies barefoot under Texas stars. But then, I saw something. Way out at the edge of the field, hidden behind a patch of tall grass, there was a slab of concrete. I walked over, brushed the grass aside, and found a rusted old metal hatch. It was locked shut. I knelt down, heart thumping. Why would an HOA build underground? I reached for a crowbar. It was a quiet Saturday morning. The cows were out by the pond, grazing in the sun. The air smelled like cedar and fresh-cut grass. For the first time in a long while, I felt peace. Then came the knock. I opened the door, and there he was. A man in a sharp gray suit. Shiny black shoes. Leather briefcase. He looked like Wall Street had taken a wrong turn and wandered into the middle of Texas. "Ethan Carter?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, keeping my distance. He held up a card. "Jonathan Miles. I'm with Redwood Real Estate Development." I crossed my arms. "Let me guess. You're here to buy the land." He smiled like I hadn't just seen his kind before. "Not exactly," he said. "I'm here to offer you a deal. One you might not want to turn down." Without waiting for an invite, he stepped inside and pulled out a thick folder. The logo on the front? Redwood Development Planning. That same name had popped up in those shady HOA files. I stiffened. He opened the folder and slid a glossy proposal across my kitchen table. The number printed at the top? $5.6 million. That was the offer. For the entire ranch. The fields. Even the parts the HOA had illegally used before. They wanted to start fresh. Build Linda's original vision, but legally this time. I didn't even bother flipping through the rest of the packet. "You were working with Linda," I said. "We were consultants," he replied, smooth as a poker player. "She may have mishandled things, but the vision's still strong. We want to build a luxury community. With your blessing." I looked at that number again. $5.6 million. It was enough to buy 5 ranches, enough to disappear. Retire. Live the life my dad never got the chance to. But then I looked out the window. At the old barn my grandfather built by hand. At the sunflowers blooming by the fence line. At the tiny American flag I'd planted the day I tore down theirs. I slid the proposal back across the table. "You know what?" I said. "I'm not selling. Not now. Not ever." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Miss Carter, be reasonable." "No," I said, leaning in. "You be reasonable. This land doesn't need fountains and golf courses. I stepped toward the door. It needs cows. It needs dirt. It needs roots. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and gave me this cold little nod. You'll regret this, he said. I already did, I replied. That's why I'm not making the same mistake again. And just like that, he walked off my porch. No threats. No lawsuits. Just a man with a weak plan, fading into the dust. But I didn't stop there. I picked up the phone and called the state attorney's office. Told them about Redwood's visit. Turns out, they were already being looked at. That flash drive we pulled from the HOA bunker? It had more connections than we thought. A whole spiderweb of shady deals and bad actors. 1 month later, Redwood's corporate accounts were frozen. Several top executives were indicted. That was the final nail in their coffin. 6 months passed. Life settled back into something that looked a lot like peace, maybe even something better. I started offering horseback tours on weekends. Local kids came out on field trips. Veterans visited Tom's field and swapped stories under the big oak tree. It felt alive again, like the land was breathing easy. Then one afternoon, standing out in the pasture where their fancy clubhouse used to sit, it hit me. They tried to wipe out my family's legacy. But instead, they made it stronger. Because now, everybody knows the name Mitchell Ranch. Not just a pin on a map, but a symbol. A reminder to stand your ground. To fight with brains and backbone. To protect what matters most. Land's not just dirt. It's history. It's honor. It's home. And hey, if you've stuck with me all the way through this story, I just want to say thank you. I didn't tell it just for me. I told it for every landowner who's been pushed around, bullied, or blindsided by people in power who thought they could take whatever they wanted. Have you been through something like this? Did you inherit land, get targeted by an HOA, or go up against the odds and come out stronger? Drop your story in the comments. Let's turn this into a space where voices that were ignored finally get heard. And if this story moved you, if you cheered when Linda got cuffed, if you smiled when I told Jonathan to take his deal and walk, then go ahead, like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. This is Ethan Mitchell, signing off from the ranch. The land is safe. The fight is over. And the story? The story belongs to us.